Hi, everybody. Welcome to another Career Foundry event this evening. I know we've got a big crowd. Anyone joining on Big Marker, just drop your name, where you're joining from, and maybe why you're interested in copywriting, UX design, UI design, why you're interested in the topics that we'll be discussing this evening, but also specifically inclusive copy. Just let me introduce myself first. I'm William, Events and Communications lead here at Career Foundry. And I do apologize. I think my internet is a tiny bit laggy this evening. We always have unexpected events and online events. And this one this evening is my internet setup. But we'll plow through. And I'm super, super happy to welcome a Career Foundry, a former colleague, Emerson, back to present how to write inclusive copy this evening. So it's going to be a super exciting event for everybody watching. We're going to be doing a live Q&A at the end, and we want this to be as interactive as possible. So please just drop any questions that you have in the public chat on the right-hand side. We're also streaming on LinkedIn and YouTube, so if you've got any questions out there do drop them, and we will get those questions answered. Now, before we kick off, let me just very, very briefly introduce Career Foundry, who we are. So Career Foundry is the online school for your career change into tech, and we guide you from complete beginner to job-ready professional in UX design and help you land that first job in the field. So we're not any old school. Our programs are so flexible that you don't need to quit your day job to change your career, and you get regular one-to-one mentorship with not one, but two industry experts. That's a mentor and a tutor. That's our dual mentorship model. And if you don't land a job within 180 days of graduation, we refund your tuition in full. So that's our job guarantee. If you've got any questions which are more specifically about Career Foundry or the programs that we offer, our curriculum, or jobs in your locality, I do recommend booking a call with one of our program advisors. So if you're on YouTube, in the description below, you can find a book a call link. And if you are joining us on Big Marker, you can just book a call in the sticky note on the top right-hand side. So that's everything from me. Emerson, I'm really, really looking forward to this event this evening. And as I said, we want to make this as interactive as possible. So please drop your any questions that you do have in the public chat. And I know that Emerson is also fantastic at engaging the audience too. So I'm going to disappear into the background. Emerson, you have the floor, and super looking forward to this. So I'll see you later.
Awesome. Hello, everybody. So let me, from my grandpa eyes, get myself on full screen with the slides here. Yeah, so I'm Emerson, and here's Career Foundry. A little bit about me. My pronouns are he or they. I'm a cat dad. Clementine, who you'll probably hear in the background at some point, is the boss of me, and there is nothing I can do about it. I have tried. So excuse any interruptions. I am obviously obsessed with inclusive design and accessibility. That's why we're here today, wherever you are in the world. And it's part of what I get to do as a UX writer at HelloFresh. And so that's me. I also, in my spare time, because we all have so much of it, right? I also work with a couple of great people currently at Better Standards Club. I'm going to drop the link in the chat here 1 second because it's relevant to tonight's talk. If you get on the site now or later, you'll find a download link for a mini guide on intersectional writing for UX. And so it's going to take some of what we talk about here, and it's going to go into a lot more depth with some of it and a little less with other parts of it, but it gives you, I think, a better, more well-rounded picture of what inclusive writing is all about. So you can check that out. And follow us on LinkedIn, and drop your email address in on the website. You'll get updates from us. It's a pretty cool side project right now. So yeah. All right. Let's have sorry, my keyboard it's the Bluetooth kind, and it's there. Now it's connected. Okay, here we are. So today we're going to cover basics of what is inclusion and inclusive design, translate to the world of writing. What does that look like? What does it mean? I want to give some quick tips for more inclusive language. I'm going to breeze through that some because the slides can be available to you afterwards. And I find that getting into the details of language, sometimes you're not going to remember all of it anyway. And so often those specifics are very specific to where you are, what you're writing, who you're writing for, a given moment in time, a project, etc. So I don't want to get too kind of lost in the weeds where that's concerned, even though it does matter very much. And I very strongly encourage you to kind of embrace whatever learning curve you have with that. But then we'll move on. We're going to talk about disability-friendly writing and assistive tech-friendly writing. And then I'm hoping we'll have time to like do a little put it into practice bit and then Q&A. But if time gets away, then we might want to just talk. Maybe I'll connect with y'all and see, do you want to do something with what we're talking about, or do you want to do the Q&A and we can kind of, prioritize accordingly. So let's jump in. I want to check the chat really quick before we start. Good. People are saying hi. More of you can say hi. This is fine. Nobody bites here. Yeah. All right. So what is inclusive design? If you've been to any other of the webinars that I've done, this is like, okay, Emerson, we already know this, but just in case, I want to make sure everybody's got the basics here. This is design that actively and intentionally, and I would add continuously, seeks to include all of your users. Really central to the idea of inclusive design, which you can read more about in Kat Holmes' book called Mismatch. Very, very, very highly recommend reading this book. Very central to this is the need to abandon the myth of the average user. There is no average user. We have all kinds of users who have all kinds of needs, who have all kinds of contexts and like things going on around them in this changing world all the time, right? And so there's no average user. We need to understand, what do we want our digital products to accomplish, and how do we make sure that anyone can do that at any time when they need to do that with the products that we design. So beyond that, inclusive design embraces this idea of the paradox of specificity, which if you don't know much about, we're going to talk about it here in a second. It's also known as the curb cut effect, and it's one of my favorite things in the world. Because there's so many fun examples of it. So they're roller carry-on bags, the little wheelie carry-on bags, pocket knives, specifically Swiss Army pocket knives, vegetable peelers, specifically the OXO Good Grips peeler. These are all examples of this. You can read more about, there's more examples and more about the paradox of specificity here at this article I wrote actually when I was working at CareerFoundry for UX Planet. So you can check that out. But the paradox of specificity tells us that adapting our efforts to the needs of a more specific audience creates solutions that are useful to a much broader audience or a broader set of needs. Okay, so the idea is that if we focus on a very specific set of needs, like zoom in on that one user who is like not at all the average user, zoom in on that one user. Chances are if we design an app or website that works really, really well for that one user, it's going to work really well for a lot of other people and probably attract even more people to our product that we didn't know might even be interested in our product. Examples. So curb cuts were put in to help for accessibility reasons, but are much more broadly useful to a lot of other people. That's where the term curb cut effect came from. The OXO peeler, this is a good story. It says there was a man who, his wife had arthritis, and he saw her in the kitchen struggling with these basic tasks. And why he didn't just peel the vegetables for her is another conversation for another day, but he did design a peeler for her where it made some of these everyday tasks a little easier. And we've all very likely had these moments with some of these kitchen utensils where it's painful, right? Good Grips, OXO, designed the Good Grips line, and then other brands started adopting it. And more often than not, when you find vegetable peelers and such, they have these wider, easier to grip handles, right? So these are two examples of something that started with a very specific set of needs and then had a much broader use, right? So this is the paradox of specificity, and it's really central to this idea of inclusive design. If you can think of other examples, not even just now, but as we go through, drop them in the chat. We won't necessarily talk about them, but just for anybody else who's watching the chat, kind of just to help round out this idea and get the texture, get the feel of what this paradox looks like in the wild. Check the chat again, see how we are. Good, nice intros happening. All right, Now, to understand what inclusive writing is, let's talk about what it is not. It is not a one-time thing. This is not oh, check it off the list and now done forever. This is not how it's going to work. It's not going to be, you can read this one book or go attend this one webinar and, okay, it's solved. This is not how it works. It is not something you can just pay someone else to take care of now and then. And it is not an impossibly massive or sensitive, I get on a soapbox about it's sensitive topics. It's not a sensitive topic. These are real things that real people are dealing with when they're trying to use our very real digital products. It's not too complicated. It's not too sensitive. It's not too big to bother with. What it is a continuous learning process. What it is an awareness. It's an awareness that we have to cultivate. It's a way of thinking where as you're going about your daily work, as you're writing content, whatever kind of content that might be, as you are helping to design screens, looking at information architecture, etc., you're constantly thinking about who does this work for? Who does this not work for? Like, who are we leaving out right now? And it's an everyday effort on a daily basis, cultivating this. And it's a big job. It's one that matters. And it is one that takes a lot of patience at times because it has not made it into the mainstream. Even though, like, how has it not? Threads was just released, and no hate to Meta, but they released this beta version without some basic accessibility features. And it's moments like this where I'm just like, accessibility really hasn't made it into design habits as much as it should. So this is the basics of what it is, kind of on a large scale, very meta, if you will. But zooming a little bit more, inclusive writing is writing that actively and intentionally seeks to include all of your readers. Okay, it seeks to create copy that works, that is equally useful, equally effective with every user, no matter who they are, no matter their race, gender, sexuality, ability, age, background, no matter how they're accessing your content. This is a big one. And no matter their context. Maybe, you're designing for somebody like me who's like, right now I'm sitting at my desk and I'm swiping through an app and doing things. But maybe that same app is going to be used by a parent who has 3 kids running around and they're trying to fix dinner and answering the phone at the same time, thinking about that context. This helps us to design and write more inclusively. All right. Okay, I'll say a little bit more, then I'm going to pause just to see if there are any pressing questions. But inclusive writing is not just the words that land on the page. It's you're taking into account a lot of other things, and that means it's going to intersect with design, and it's going to intersect with development or coding, especially when you're looking at, as I say here, copy formatting and styling, where things land on the screen and how it looks. But then also, if you're writing for assistive technology like screen readers, there's a lot of that happens in the code, which means really working closely with your developers in making sure that you're creating an experience, co-creating an experience that's really going to work well for all of your users. So all of that is a part of inclusive writing. So it's writing, and it's a lot more than that. Right? Now, I'm going to take a brief pause, leave this on the screen for a sec. Are there any, just pop it in the chat if there's any pressing questions, just something that's kind of going to get in the way if we move forward into some, as you can see, slightly more dense content before we come back out and look at practical stuff. So I'm going to give it a second, drink some tea. Nothing pressing. I'm going to give it 5 more seconds. Make sure somebody has time to type. Okay, I'm going to go ahead, but if you're formulating something, you need more time to do that, go ahead and do it. We'll catch it, okay? So beyond this, as we're getting more into the details of it, inclusive writing is anti-racist and free of culturally appropriative words or phrases, and there will be more information on that in a minute. It's free of slurs or other language. It can be just not mindfully chosen language that would exclude users or cause harm in any way to any degree to one of your readers. Particularly, you want to think particularly about readers from underrepresented groups that are often marginalized. So people of color, people from the queer community, people with disabilities, etc. Yeah. And again, this is really dense, I know. We'll get into some examples. And yeah. Inclusive writing is also, it's written, it's structured, it's formatted in a way that's going to work well for people who have disabilities. It's going to work well for people with dyslexia, people who are blind or have low vision, etc. Okay. And this really takes into account that what I mentioned, this collaboration with development and what is happening behind the scenes, like behind the screen, what's happening there that is enabling that more accessible content. And then finally, inclusive writing is accessible to readers who will perceive the content, and this is related to that, through non-visual means or who experience color vision deficiency. This is also frequently called color blindness. I'm putting that in air quotes. And I've got more that I'm going to say about that stuff in a minute as well. Now, what do you notice about all of these things? What do these things have in common? Any thoughts here? We are not a chatty bunch tonight. That's okay. I'll give you the answer. There's not just one right answer. But as I was writing this, as I was typing this out, I was like, okay, all of these are bigger things than you can just check off of a list. These are bigger things than you can just read about once and then like, okay, now I know. These are all things that are going to take exactly what I said, a continuous learning process. It's a continuous learning process. And Joelle, I hope I said your name correctly, as Joelle said, they're more related to fringe cases. And I wouldn't call them fringe cases so much as I would say those more specific cases, those more specific sets of needs, which tells us that if we focus here, there's a good chance we kind of we activate this sort of paradox of specificity where we focus on these more inclusive needs, this more specific set of needs, and meet the needs of a much larger audience. And Brianna, it's forever changing. Exactly. Some of these things we learn more as we go, right? As a culture, we're learning more. As individuals, we're learning more. And also a lot of these things like when you're talking about racism, when you're talking about cultural appropriation, when you're talking about how people of color, how queer people want to be referred to or talked about or talked to, like these are also very individual things, right? They're very individual things. When you're talking about disability, some people with disabilities prefer this sort of person first language versus the identity or disability first language. So it's all very individual, and it's very much a process that involves checking your ego at the door, because you're going to make mistakes. If some aspect of this is not in your experience, you're going to make mistakes. And even if they are, we've got to be able to just call ourselves out when that happens and call ourselves into a learning process. All right, now let's see what we have here. Now there's, information overload warning for the next slides. I'm going to go through these fairly quickly because this is where as I said at the beginning, we can really get into the weeds in talking about specific language things, and you should say this and you shouldn't say this and all of this. We want to make sure that we're not getting lost in things that really need to be that longer learning process. So we're not sitting here trying to memorize things and quick tips for more inclusive writing is what's on the next few slides. I'm going to pick a few to just focus on, and then the rest you can read through and practice on your own. So don't stress. Kein Stress. So when it comes to race and ethnicity, as a general rule, writing on any assumptions about a person's race or ethnicity, not a good thing. So instead, really ask yourself if race is coming into what you're writing about someone or whatever it might be, really ask yourself, is this relevant? Why do I need this? Why do I need to write about this in the first place? And if you find that no, you actually do, I would ask yourself again to make sure and why, and then reach out to the person, do your research or reach out to the person and see how do they want to be referred to. A good example of this is and Americans, I am one, are notorious at assuming that every Black person is an African American. This is not true. This is simply not true. So that's one example. Instead of assuming someone's gender or sexuality or pronouns, and that's a big one, okay? Instead of doing that, again, ask yourself, does their gender need to even come into this? Do I need to use pronouns? Do your research. Chances are they've got pronouns somewhere, especially if you're questioning their gender, because those of us, but even if you're not, if you're just judging their gender based on how they look, do your research, do your research, okay? And then when in doubt, you avoid pronouns. You don't talk about gender, you use their name instead, quite simply. Yeah, I just saw in the chat, Lila, yes, there's a document that goes into more detail in some of these things and not others. If you go to Better Standards Club, I'll just pop that in here again. Pop in your email address and you can download a mini guide to intersectional writing. So yeah. Okay, so that's gender and sexuality. And here's slides. They're very much important. I very much want you to come back to them, but I'm gonna push through here because we need to get to other things and want to make sure we have time for Q&A at the end. But okay, so that was a lot of talking I just did. Do we have any pressing questions? I just looked in the QA. I'm going to go ahead and answer this one because I think it is important. Tali, and again, if I'm mispronouncing your names, I'm so sorry. How do you get a client on board with investing in inclusive writing and not seeing it as an edge case? That is a good question. It's all about building this sort of business case for inclusion. I would start by reading Kat Holmes, her book Mismatch, and I'll put it in the chat here. Send it. Nope, that's in the QA. Hold on one second. There you go. That's what I would start with, because Kat Holmes worked at, among other places, Microsoft, and helped them put together their whole inclusive design toolkit. Any of Kat Holmes' content is a masterclass in building a business case for inclusive design, and inclusive writing factors into that. So I would start there, really looking at paradox of specificity, finding those examples. That's where I would start. I won't go into a whole lot more detail because that could be a whole webinar on its own. Start there and connect with me on LinkedIn if you want to talk about it more. So, all right, any other pressing questions? You hear Clementine? Yeah, there she is. Okay, I'm going to move forward. So disability-friendly writing. This isn't just in how we talk about people with disabilities. This is how we create content that works well for them. If content is not accessible, it's not content for some part of your audience, okay? So word choice, format, and structure. These are three really, really important things in that. So I saw something in the chat before. Somebody said something about writing to a specific grade level. And yes, this is really important. Not just for, say, people with reading difficulties like dyslexia, other types. Second language, if somebody's, it's not the language that the piece that the content is in is not someone's first language. Writing to a more approachable grade level it makes it more inclusive. It makes it more accessible. And notice I did not say a lower grade level. I said a more approachable one because that's what it is. Right? The Hemingway editor, this app, which I've linked in the presentation, is useful for this. You copy paste your content into the tool, into the editor, and it does, as you can see in this picture, it gives you these color-coded highlights for how to fix it. And you can go through and just revise, and you watch the little counter at the side, kind of the grade level changes as you make these changes. It's like almost gamified. It's really interesting. One thing I noticed about the Hemingway app is that it is not fully, it's not perfect accessibility for people with color vision deficiency, because, well, I've linked here another app that you can download. Sim Daltonism is really, really interesting because it creates this, when you run the app, it is a screen, kind of like any of your tabs or whatever, windows, that you can put over whatever you're working on. It's an overlay, and you can set it to show different types of CVD, and you can see what does the screen look like if you have particular types of CVD. It's really, really interesting, very helpful. So check that out. She's being insistent. CVD is color vision deficiency. Yeah. So it's popularly, more popularly called color blindness. That's not fully accurate, but yeah. All right, so next up, in disability-friendly writing, avoiding special formatting, bold, underline, italics, things like this. First of all, for people with dyslexia, this can be very much not helpful, but also formatting like this is not picked up by screen readers. So if you're trying to convey some sort of meaning with some of this formatting, it's not useful by a screen reader, okay? And I think in general can add visual clutter that just doesn't work. If you're someone like me I have a lot of sensory processing, I get very easily overwhelmed when screens are too busy, and that kind of formatting can really throw me off, and then I have a hard time focusing, just as an example. Ensure that there's a high contrast between your copy and the background that it's on. You can use Sim Daltonism to kind of check it, but then you can also look up web accessibility guidelines, and it gives you very specific ratios and ways to check it. So avoiding special characters that you can easily supplement with copy, okay? Hashtag symbols, slashes, things like this. Really question, do I need to use this here, or is there another alternative? Because again, visual noise, and stuff that is screen readers and other assistive technology isn't necessarily going to interpret the way that you mean it. So, and then sans serif fonts. Again, when you add the serif to the fonts, it's more noise visually, and it's not helpful. So yeah, just these tips. I am watching the chat, but if I've missed something, feel free to post a question again. So so this is when it comes to formatting, formatting and structure, especially if you're writing long form content, but this applies to any content, as far as, any of these points is applicable. Using correct and sequential headings and paragraph formatting. If you're in a word processing sort of document, Google Docs, or if you're working in some sort of a content management system or working with your developers, making sure that your content has the right heading and paragraph tags is really important, not just because the formatting provides visual hierarchy, but because, again, with screen readers, it guides screen readers through the content. And there are ways that, so people who use screen readers will often, let me back this out. So for those of us who are sighted, when we're looking at a screen, say it's a piece of long form content, like a blog article, as we're scrolling through that, a good article and a good accessible article is structured. It's going to have, like I list here, a table of contents, manageable paragraphs, a logical flow. And it's going to have headings so that we can kind of skim and look at the headings and be like, where's the information I'm looking for? If those are not formatted properly behind the screen, like in the code, then people who use screen readers or other assistive tech are not going to have the ability to just skim through and find that content. They're going to have to go all the way through the content to find what they're looking for, which means you're going to lose readers. So yeah. Right. I feel like this is such an information dump. So tell me to hit the brakes or ask a question if you got something. Yeah. Okay. I'm going to take a little tea break. So we're going to talk about assistive technology, because I find, at least in the conversations that I've had with others kind of in this product design space, there's not as much knowledge about, how assistive technology works and how to design and write in a way that works well for this tech. I am not going to go on a deep dive. We're going to go very, very basic, because the deep dive is, they're separate webinars, like whole other things that you can do. There are whole courses and certifications that you can do in this. So Now let's just get into it. But rule of thumb, your copy is not final if it is not compatible with assistive technology. Now let's get into what you can do to make it accessible to assistive technology. So the two forms that we're going to talk about are keyboard navigation and screen readers. There's a lot of other types of assistive tech, a lot. Most of them are based on one or both of these, as I understand it, okay? So if you can write in a way that's going to work well and design, etc., in a way that's going to work well for keyboard navigation and screen readers, chances are good that it's going to work well for other assistive tech, all right? So talking about keyboard navigation, most of us have done some form of keyboard navigation if we've used any sort of keyboard shortcuts, Control Z, Control C, all of these types of things that we do. But people who use keyboard navigation, typically this is utilized when a person has limited use of their hands, or for movements, or if they're low vision and they use they're zooming in on the screen a lot, because keyboard navigation makes it a lot easier not to get lost in the content. Let me actually show you kind of what this looks like for a second. Wait 1 second to figure out technology myself. Thank you for your patience. Lila, yeah, the deep dive is deep. It's very true. Very, very true. All right. If you cannot see my screen, please let me know. You should be able to see it. So this is the HelloFresh page. And I'm just going to click here. So basic keyboard navigation. If I tap on the tab key, if you have tapping capabilities, you see where the blue outline is right here. Okay, so this is called keyboard focus, and you want to make sure that you're working with your designers to be sure that keyboard focus is perceivable, so that users who need keyboard navigation know where they are on the screen. Okay, now see what you notice. I'm just gonna hit the tab key again. Right. Okay, now where did that jump? Go back. So you go back by going Shift Tab. At least this is true with my current settings. And then I tab again. So you notice I hit tab again. There we are. It skips down here. Okay. So it skips through, goes through the menu. It's skipping to the active elements on the screen is what the tab is going to do. It goes to anything that is, you can click it and it will do something. Okay. That might be a menu item. That might be a button. That might be a text that has that's linked, that's hyperlinked. But it skips through the active elements in the page. Now, if we want to, let me just tab, or actually view our plans. If you want to select something, you hit enter, and then it'll take you to the thing that you selected. Okay. So that's basics of how keyboard navigation works. Let me just go back really quick to my slides. Come on. There we go. So as I said, keyboard focus needs to be perceivable. And that's not just for people who can see the screen. This is also because it can help if there's some combination of keyboard, screen reader things, if there's some combination of these things going on, if keyboard focus is not showing something on the active elements, then something in those active elements is not right, okay? And actually, I'm going to go back to the HelloFresh, that HelloFresh page, because I want to show you something that we worked on recently that was really, really fun. There should be no skipped active elements if you're going to do a quick check on a page. And a page should be fully operable with keyboard-only navigation. Okay, fully operable. Nothing that they should be able to do that they can't do. All right. So I'm going to go back here for a second and share my screen. Okay. So I had gone in to do a quick accessibility check, and when you ask about getting stakeholders to kind of buy into accessibility, I feel really lucky, like spoiled in the sense that everybody I've talked to at HelloFresh, the people I work with directly about accessibility, there's always just this radical sort of openness, like, okay, so how do we make this work better? And oh my gosh, I didn't know that. And I've never had to build a case for it, which is amazing and says a lot about the design team there and how they prioritize things. But I did notice that as I went through this audit, I went in, I just was doing this, what I just showed you, tabbing through, okay? And when I hit tab the first time, we come to select plan. Back then when I did this audit, when I hit tab again, it skipped all the way over here to the number of people selection on step 2, which means this entire first step of choose your preferences was absolutely inaccessible by keyboard nav, which means also when I checked it in the screen reader just skipped over it completely. Skipped over it. Or it would allow me to read, if I like changed the settings and was looking at headings and copy, it would allow me to read things, but nothing was selectable, which kind of defeats the purpose of the whole thing, right? See, there's a question in the how important is making the combination of logos and images and text MCT buttons when it comes? We're going to get to that. So, and if you don't feel like that question, Maria, is answered sufficiently by the end, definitely like bring it to my attention and we'll talk more about it. So, yeah. So I took this to the relevant team and I said, hey, all this is bad because like the very first step, like we want people to be able to sign up for a box, to have a plan, like, let's go. And immediately right out the gate, anyone who is using assistive tech is going to have to ask somebody else to come and help them sign up for this thing, or they're going to go elsewhere. And so, but watch what we do now. When I hit tab, look where we go to the next active element on the screen, etc. Okay. Now I want to go backwards for a second because I'm going to show you, how it works. So if I go tab, let's say we want veggie and quick and easy, that's my lifestyle. Then we can skip over here and we can pick the number of people, the number of meals per week. And again, you tab through, shift tab to go backwards, enter to select. And then we go tab again and we can select this plan and we can sign up. Okay. So that's how keyboard navigation should work. I'll bring the slides back here. All right, that was a deep dive. Any questions about keyboard navigation and what we need to make that work well without going into the super deep dive? I did link an article from WebAIM that will go into a lot more detail on this. So you'll have that available to you as well. Give it a little pause, partly because I feel like I'm talking so much. All right. Now, this is a lot of words on the screen. Don't panic. So talking about screen readers, and I want to take this kind of slowly. It's all very logical. Like screen readers are extremely like annoyingly logical. All right. So might be stating the obvious, but screen readers are used by people who are blind or low vision, but they're used by a lot of other people based on a lot of other needs, disabilities, and other needs. So when we talk about like building this business case for accessibility, it's not just people with disabilities. So you're not just looking at, okay, what percentage of our users actually have disabilities? This is not the only thing that matters. You're thinking about the broader context and times that people use assistive tech. Siri and other voice activators, this is assistive technology. It's not specifically assistive technology for people with disabilities. It's not specifically only designed for them, but these are examples of it, right? So remember that it's always a broader audience. Now, they're highly logical. They read in the direction that the language rules dictate. So for English, for example, they're going to read left to right, and they're going to read top to bottom. Okay. And that's no matter what, right? Unless you work with your developers and make sure that content is grouped in a way that it's going to read like differently. It's going to break those rules in essence. How content is grouped in the code has a high impact on the experience then, and I'll talk about more about that in just a second. Headings and labels really matter. Like I said before, if somebody who is using a screen reader wants to just swipe through and catch the headings to see where do they want to go, and this is not coded properly, if it's not in the code, if it's not in the formatting, it's not going to work, which means they're going to make them go all the way through all the things before they find what they might be looking for. It's a lot of extra work that we're making our users do. Alt copy. Here's another thing to think about, but that's kind of in the same category as labels, which I'll talk about in a second. And knowing when to have the code kind of ignore content for assistive text. So let's look at this, the image that's on the right side of this slide. I hope you all can see that relatively clearly. You don't need to be able to read all of it. It's in German anyway. But we have here at the top, we have a picture of one of the meals. This is actually one that I'll be getting in my box next week. Actually, it's kind of making me hungry to look at it. And then you have, okay, it's a bestseller. You have this little pill, and then you have the name, the title of the recipe, some information about it. And then you have these little bits of information here. That it takes 40 minutes to cook. That's the total time, how many calories per serving, etc. Okay. Now, and then below that, you have like information on allergies, etc. So if a screen reader is reading this from top to bottom, left to right, what is the first thing it is going to read? Any wild guesses? Is it going to start with the image? Or is it going to start with the pill? Or is it going to start with the title? It's probably going to start with bestseller or with the image and then bestseller. It's going to be one of the two, right? It's going to be one of the two. Unless we tell it to do otherwise, okay? And that means working, again, with our amazing and magical developers, okay? In an instance like this, when we talk about picking out which things the screen reader can ignore, kind of skip over. In this instance, we don't want a screen reader to skip over that image. We want to describe this image. We want them to know what they're going to be eating, right? Because it's relevant. It's relevant. And so this would be provided in the alt copy, the image description. Exactly, Lila. Yeah, so we would include it in that. And then we're also going to want to work with our developers to say, okay, but how do we want this grouped so that they're getting the most relevant information first? And in this instance, I would want to say, okay, the name of the recipe, a description of the image, and then to get into these details, right? Because some of these details about the image are going to be included in this little summary down here. Sometimes, maybe not. But then a really interesting thing, let's look at these details about how long it takes to cook, etc. Again, we're reading left to right, top to bottom. What's going to happen here? Any thoughts? What's the order that things are going to get read? Give you a sec. It's not a test. You're not being graded on this, I promise. Okay. Yeah, pass the image. So we're looking down here. Yes, exactly. The minutes together and then the line under. Thank you. So it's gonna read 40 minutes, Arbeitszeit, Gesamtzeit. It's gonna read it that way, which is not gonna work well because then we're saying 40 minutes. Like, wait, what? So what we want is we're going to talk to our developers, our amazing developers, and we're going to say, hey, we need these grouped together so that we can say 40 minutes Arbeitszeit, 40 minutes Gesamtzeit, this 1,000 some odd calories, etc. Okay, we want it to read top to bottom, top to bottom, top to bottom, top to bottom in these 4 containers. All right, so that's what I mean by content being grouped. All right, yeah. We're going to get more into kind of when to have the code ignore certain aspects of the content and labels in just a minute. But for right now, based on what I've shared here, I'm going to pause and see if there are questions. some more tea. Who would the open conversation with developers about screen reading would be the UX writer, the UI designer? I think this all depends, honestly, because if accessibility is not baked into the process already, whoever should be talking to developers about this is whoever knows it and notices, right, and catches it. It needs to be this sort of proactive thing. What about audio? Marie, I'm not sure what you mean by that. Can you say more? But going back to Marissa's question about who should open that conversation up with developers, typically, like I work in teams with developers and designers, right? And it depends somewhat on how things are constructed. But yeah, I mean, for me, like in my teams, sometimes it's a designer who brings it up, sometimes it's me. Sometimes there's, depending on the project or the initiative, sometimes there's accessibility annotations that I will do in the design file that I share with the developers, and then I meet them, we go through it. Kind of depends. So, okay, back to Maria's question. What about audio? For example, in this case, is it worthy to think about maybe this assistant that read the recipes out loud like audio? Absolutely. Audio assistants, this is a thing. Screen readers do that. There are other types of audio tech that can be used. So yes, and if it doesn't work well in a screen reader test, which I can tell you all how to do a screen reader test too. I mean, it's pure chaos if you're not used to using a screen reader. There's like, that's a whole learning curve and a whole webinar, probably a whole series of webinars of its own. But if it doesn't run through smoothly in that kind of a test, it's not probably going to work well for other types of audio assistants. And there may be exceptions to that, but I think as a general rule, if you want to make sure it's going to work across all kinds of assistive tech, make sure it's going to read things in order for a screen reader. Yeah. All right. Other pressing questions. I just saw a little red dot in the Q&A. Okay, that we'll come back to later since it's not directly for this. All right, we're going to move forward. Stop me if you don't want to. All right, so some quick tips for more assistive tech friendly writing. Some general rules to just get you started. The first thing I would suggest is getting hands-on with this and getting really, experimenting with keyboard navigation, and try using a screen reader native to your devices usually. So if you have an Android phone, you have TalkBack. If you have an Apple device, you have VoiceOver. If you have something else, you might need to look up what the other ones are called. But there's usually a free assistive tech sort of feature on your devices. Check out what that is and then Google tutorials. How to use TalkBack. My first few times using VoiceOver was so overwhelming. So like pace yourself. I looked up tutorials. I was like, okay. And then I have the tutorial open on my computer so that it's not affected by VoiceOver. And then I have VoiceOver on my phone where I can just turn Siri on at any point and be like, turn VoiceOver off if I can't navigate to accessibility settings again. But get in there and try, and I'll have these tutorials open. I'm like, okay, let me try this kind of a gesture with my thumb and see what happens, Learn how to use these in a very basic way. You will start noticing things immediately that you can do differently when you produce content. If you start using this tech, you will start noticing things that you can do differently. This is a tip. The third one here is a tip that I've only just started kind of moving in this direction myself, is to learn some basic coding, HTML to start, so that you have a better sense of where that user-facing copy, because copy for assistive tech that will be read out by a screen reader, for example, this is user-facing copy, belongs to UX writing. Get a sense of where that lands in the code. What is read out loud? Is it a label? Is it, where does that belong? Where does it go? Bonus, this also helps you to speak the language of your developers so that you can say, hey, right here, we need to use this label or whatever it might be. Okay. More tips, again, from one of my favorite apps in the world. I love Headspace. I love it so much. As often as possible, make what is on the screen work well for assistive tech so that the design, the copy already works well for a screen reader. If that can happen, and that takes collaboration with your designers, but the Headspace is a really good example of this, because look at this. If you read this top to bottom, left to right, are there any issues? Just in the reading order. It's pretty straightforward. And then what they have in terms of this, the lower navigation, it says today, explore, and then Emerson. Me. But in general, these buttons, it's not, they label them, okay? They give you an icon, but then they put something right below so that you have some idea of what the purpose of that might be, okay? Yeah. Now, what can get interesting is as they get into, you see here, it says guided program, managing stress. And then it has this little steps icon. It says beginner level. And then you have the calendar, 4 weeks. And you have the person led by Kasanga, who's, if you don't use Headspace, you should. And if you do, and you haven't checked out Kasanga's meditations, you're missing out. So, but how, thinking about that as a UX writer, or as a designer, or whatever your role might be, thinking about, okay, somebody who's using a screen reader, how are they going to encounter this? Is this little stepladder icon, is this important for them? Does it add value to what we're communicating? Or can we just say beginner level? Because the stepladder is indicating a level, yes. So maybe we have our developers just skip over that icon and just say beginner level. But then in the case of this one, it says 4 weeks. What does that mean? Might change then the label of this, might change it, or have it skip over and give some alternative copy here that says duration, 4 weeks, 10 minutes a day, something like this. And here I would just skip the person and say led by Kasanga, because that's implied, right? In the content that's on the screen. Okay, that was a lot. So I'm going to take a quick look at the chat. Let's see. There need to be extra words indicating there's a each time, right? Lila, I'm not sure what you're referring to there, so you can say more in the chat if you would like. But yeah, in general, you want to make sure that what you have on the screen, as much as possible, will on its own work for assistive text, so that you don't have to work with your developers and say, like, so skip over this and then say this instead, or whatever it might be. Okay. Now let's take a look at, how are we on time? Ooh, all right. Here is another example. Take a look at this screen. This is another example of this. The little heart icon here and the little time, the little clock icon here. So are these relevant to users who can't see? Maybe they're blind. Are these icons relevant? What they do is relevant, right? The icons themselves may not be relevant. And if you're not careful, if the whole team is not careful about how this is presented to these users, what they're going to get is some sort of weird thing that's like heart icon, or heart button. And it's like, okay, Headspace beautifully just labels it favorites button. Okay. Exactly, Maria. The function is relevant. The appearance of the icon is not relevant. Okay. With icons that specifically to do with functions and settings, these things, like, what's important is what it accomplishes. And that's, we want to give these users the shortest path to getting that thing done. Okay. And then they label the clock one as recents, which is nice, and in some ways clearer than what the icon even indicates to me, and I'm sighted. So interesting. Will, I want to check in with you time-wise on what we have time for.
We've got as long as you need, Emerson. So take it away. There's no pressure.
Oh, watch. Be careful what you say. Careful what you give me permission for. All right, because I can talk about this over days. I won't. I want to respect people's time, but let me think for a second. Okay, look, this is what I was thinking for like a practical exercise. I saw a question in the Q&A, and I think there might be others. So we can do this sort of workshop-y thing if you want to. But I think then we risk we won't have time for as many questions or any. So give me a few hints in the I tell you what, see the emojis? Can you find the emoji reactions below? I'm not sure where it is on your screen. Give me a party, the party popper, the ta-da, if you want to do the workshop. Give me a heart if you want to do questions. Give me the party. Well, people are clapping. I don't know what that means. Jump over to something else. Okay, Anna, thank you for coming. I appreciate it. Okay, we've got practical stuff. Any hearts for the Q&A? We're all doing the practical thing. All right, let's go. All right. Okay, wow, I get the point. Okay. We'll have some time for Q. We're going to split this. Okay, we're going to be brief. You ready? We can do this. So take a look at this form question, right? It says gender, and then there's an asterisk and indicating that it's a required question. And then the options we're giving our users is female, male, or rather not to say. Now, think about a copy solution that might feel more inclusive. And I want you to think about, particularly since we didn't go through those slides in detail, users who, like me, identify somewhere else in the genderverse, in the gender universe, okay? If someone is neither male nor female, if someone is, which remember, there are many options within that world, okay? Yeah, think about that. Think about the use of gender, okay? And a good solution, as the hint tells you, is you're not going to use any of the words currently listed as options. Any of them, okay? Non-binary, yes. Okay, yes, we could provide an option for non-binary. What else might we do? Use an open form. Hey, Rebecca, yes. Okay, so giving an open text field. Now, the problem with an open text field is that you might be I'm going to come back to what you said. Yes. With an open text field, sometimes this is not friendly to kind of collating data, and it can take a lot more time to kind of gather that data and quantify, because people can put a lot of different things in an open text field, okay? And Karen. So Karen and Cross bring up very interesting points. Why are we asking about gender at all? Okay, so first question as you workshop this is saying, why are we asking this? What do we need to know? Do we need to know the sex, not gender, the sex that is listed on their government issued ID, for example, or what's on their birth certificate? What are we asking for? Are we asking truly for their gender or their sex? These are two different things. And even if we're asking for sex, there should be more than two options, because intersex people exist. So that's one thing. Okay, is it relevant to what we need, and what are we actually asking for? The other thing somebody brought, Melissa, you said an option to choose pronouns. Are we asking them this so that we can customize content in the future, and to use correct pronouns? Which in that case, why are we not just asking for pronouns? You know, and in that case, an open text field seems appropriate, because there are many, many, many options for pronouns. The trick there is that some people use no pronouns. They want just their name used, and pronouns can cause a lot of dysphoria, that in itself. And so you want to think about that as well, and giving them an option that's not just going to feel like, okay, well, they didn't think about me when they wrote this copy, where the placeholder for a pronoun is no pronoun, something like this. So if that's the option, if that's what we're looking for in asking this question, we should just use their name. It's more personal anyway, So yes, asking why you want to know in the first place, And then if you truly need to understand this, like say you're working on maybe it's a medical app, even then, medical community says that gender it's more complex. It's more complex than breaking it down in these two ways. So there's a lot of different ways that you need to think about this. I know that I think it's Ada Health. When they ask for, I don't remember if they ask for gender or sex. I think they ask for sex. When they ask for this, they also have a little note or a tooltip or something that opens that says, we know gender is more complex than this. Right now, the information, the research, the solutions we can offer you is broken up in this very binary way. And so, they at least acknowledge the difficulty there. Yeah. Yeah, and exactly, Maria, why not just using a name? Okay. But if you want some more inclusive solutions or some other solutions, here are some. If you really need to ask for gender, I would say so this one says, what is your gender identity? Select all that apply. This is my favorite one. Well, and this one over on the other side where it says gender, check one or more options that reflect your gender, because often gender it's more layered. For example, I am a transgender, non-binary guy is how I identify. Okay. And so I would want to use multiple fields in this. Okay. One thing I would say is to avoid two of these options have other. This can be one of the most, I can't even tell you, as a non-binary person, dehumanizing experiences to be like, are you a man? Are you a woman? Or are you other? And this happens, I've seen this in forms related to race as well, other. And it's this very like, oh, you're this box that's over there that doesn't actually matter. And so I would say to avoid other if at all possible. So yeah, there's that. Exactly, Brandon. It's quite triggering. Okay, people are ducking out. So we're gonna wind down. Will, can we take a couple questions maybe? I have more time, so.
Oh,
Yeah,
let me just unmute myself. Emerson, thanks for presenting, also for illustrating some great practical examples. I think it always comes to life when you actually see websites or you go through forms or you actually see what's going on and what's wrong and how you can improve. I think that really helps. Let's jump into some questions, and maybe I'll just kick it off too. From your perspective, what do you think are some common challenges or barriers for integrating more inclusive copy for some companies? Because I know also we've got the scale of companies, some massive corporations, some smaller design agencies. What do you think some of the main challenges are?
I think if it's not the biggest challenges, if it's not baked into the process, then it's this constant individuals needing to educate, needing to bring awareness to that. And then needing to slow down production processes to be like, no, wait, we have to do this instead. We can't roll this out immediately because we have to do this other thing that we should have done 3 months ago or whatever it is, I think the other issue is communicating around it, especially if you don't already have buy-in, especially if you're working with people like, and I love my POs. If they ever see this, I love y'all. You are not the problem, but product owners, project managers are very oriented towards their job is to move things forward. And I think that is when it becomes very important to say, okay, look, this is something that must be fixed, and demonstrating like, okay, we don't have to have a perfectly accessible thing. If it's absolutely impossible, here's the must fix, and here is the fix it soon after, and get that patched. Definitely not ideal, but yeah, it's the timelines. I think that's the other big challenge. So,
do you think there are some kind of safeguards that you could put in place to ensure that it is always included as part of the process, or?
Yeah, I think accessibility audits help, because then you can really demonstrate like, hey, double A standards by the web. Oh my gosh, why am I blanking? I just came back from medical leave, y'all, and my brain is kind of ticking along in a way that is not optimal. The Web Accessibility Standards Guidelines, double A is the rating you need to be legally compliant. That's the minimum to be legally compliant. And I'm talking about in the US. different countries have different guidelines, but AA is the most common one. And you would be shocked at how many products don't measure up. So I think bringing in that and saying like, hey, this has to be done. That and checklists of like, check off these minimum things. Once those are ticked off, we have a AA accessible feature or product or whatever it would be. Yeah.
Awesome. I'm going to jump into the questions now. If anyone does have any questions, now's the time to answer, to ask. I am also taking questions on LinkedIn too. So I've got another tab open here. Let me just ask an earlier question that came up from Tali. How do you get a client on board with investing in inclusive writing and not seeing it as an edge case?
Yeah, we talked about this one a bit before. I would say if it doesn't work to kind of bring in examples of like, here's the experience of a person who is maybe a person who has got a disability or somebody who is not the, and I hate saying it, but average user, taking one of those exceptional users and showing them here are the difficulties that this creates, and helping to generate that empathy can really help, because that can balance out this focus on the business case. But then I think a good business case for accessibility is legality. When you bring legal into it, like there's a good case for it there, because you're avoiding lawsuits, literally avoiding lawsuits when you can make sure you have a at least minimally accessible product. Yeah.
Awesome. And then I'm going to switch over to LinkedIn. There's one question come through from Clifton. How do you separate bias from paradox of specificity?
I'm not sure I understand separating bias from
the paradox of
paradox of specificity. Yeah, I'm not quite sure I understand the question of how those might need to be separated.
Clifton, if you can expand on that in the window that we have, please do, and we will jump back in.
Yeah. Or by all means, connect with me on LinkedIn and ask me there. I'm happy to kind of dig into it. Yeah.
There's also a question on LinkedIn from Deborah. Are there any standards for interaction design accessibility for AR, VR, and XR?
Say that again.
Are there any standards for interaction design for AR, VR, and XR? And that's from Deborah.
I would check. Goodness. If there are, I haven't done, because I've never worked on any of these types of products. If there are, and I'm sure there are, I would check with the web accessibility guidelines, even though that's not web. I would check with WebAIM. I would start there. I've never worked on these types of products, so I can't answer that question fully. I'm really sorry. Yeah.
If there are any specific questions, though, we can also get back on LinkedIn. So
definitely,
there's always we can also do follow-up questions.
Yeah.
Let me just jump back over into LinkedIn. I'm sorry, I mean Big Marker. Let's have a look. There's one question here from Marissa. Sorry, this is a stupid question, but if you're writing for a target audience of majority females, e.g. the brand PLT, they often address audience with hun or babe, for example. Is that considered non-inclusive or audience relevant?
I don't know if I can answer this question, because those words are very triggering for me. I think it depends, because like, okay, so majority females, I want to understand what that means. Because are we talking about people who are assigned female at birth? That doesn't necessarily mean that they identify as women. And so it's a little bit like, I would say it's a good question. It's not a stupid question at all. It's a good question to ask. And it's a good question, like if you're in the position to do it, to push back on these things and say, I mean, because I know plenty of cis women who would not like that, And so I think something like that, I'm like, where's the research on this? Because you can even exclude people who identify as women, and that is the target audience. You can even exclude them because they have experiences that's negative,
I'm just picking up a couple of last questions. There's one from Maria come through. How important is making the combination of logos, images, and text in some CTA buttons when it comes to inclusive design and writing?
I'm looking at it too. I want to read it again, make sure I understand how important is making the combination. So this, Maria, this is where it's going to really, like, when we talk about content groups and choosing what things are skipped over and which things are not, is really going to matter. Like if you look at, say, like the Apple Pay logo, when you like tap to, I don't know how many of you use Apple Pay, but when you tap to use Apple Pay, sometimes it's just an apple that appears on there. Sometimes it's an apple that says pay, or, some combination of these things that needs to be grouped, all of these elements as one button. And then you really want to decide, like, how do you want this to read out, and think about that. And that's going to be in the accessibility labels and how that's coded. So, yeah, I think it's very important to answer the question. I'm going to say just a little bit more about that, because like you're also specifying that this isn't a CTA, and CTAs typically come at very important parts in the UX, where you've given users information and you want them to take this action. And if you want them to take action, you have to make it easy for them to take that action. And if you're making them listen to a whole bunch of gobbledygook before they can take action, it's not helpful. So, yeah. Okay, now I'm done.
For sure. I am mindful of the time, and it is moving forward. So I would like to say, Emerson, thank you so much for presenting this evening. It was super insightful. And I think it's great, as I said before, to pull out the practical examples, to just give everybody kind of like, firsthand example of what is wrong and what we can do to improve. Yeah. And I think this is kind of what I've learned along the way, is that it's kind of like we're trying to move in that direction all the time. We're not at the end point, but as long as we're moving along, I think that's a great goal, I think, for everybody.
Yeah. That's the thing. It's patience and progress over the actual, like, okay, and now it's fully accessible. It's movement forward. So yeah.
I think as long as we're moving the needle forward, it's definitely a good job. And I did notice a couple of comments asking about the recording. Yes, we will be sending a copy of the recording around to tomorrow. Please do also check your spam and also the promotional mailbox too. Sometimes they get lost, but if you don't find it in your email box, we did also stream it on YouTube. And if you go to the CareerFoundry YouTube channel, the CareerFoundry YouTube team will love this too. Check out the videos, but we've also, if you click on the section live streams, you'll also find this there too. For anybody who's watching this evening and is interested in jumping into a career as a copywriter, especially UX writing or UX design in more general terms, we are currently offering a tuition reduction worth up to $1,370 or €1,195 off the full price of our UX and UI design programs. And if you'd like to claim that, simply book a call with one of our program advisors by either clicking on the link which I've added to Big Marker in the top right hand corner, or if you go to the description below in YouTube, you'll also find the link there. Also, do check out the CareerFoundry blog. We've had some fantastic editors working in the past at CareerFoundry and at present who maintain the blog, and there are some great examples of UX writing, inclusive writing, but also some articles related to diversity and inclusion too. I would recommend checking out those. And also, if you're interested in UX design, do check out the CareerFoundry short course. We've got a free short course, which I think is 5 or 6 days, where you'll get a taster of everything that we offer. Emerson, once again, thank you so much for presenting this evening. That was super insightful. I know that you're doing some future events too with CareerFoundry. I want to say next month. Is that true?
Next week, we have one on how to become a UX writer. So yeah, and I'm still working on that.
Even sooner. So next week. So go to the CareerFoundry events page and also check out the upcoming events too. Thank you everyone for all your questions. Emerson, thanks for joining, and we will see you next week.
Bye, y'all.
Just